Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember to support, please subscribe, the death of Anne of Cleves, fourth wife to Henry VIII. A topic that isn't often discussed, overshadowed by the deaths of others, is Anne of Cleves, fourth wife to the tyrant King Henry VIII. Anne and Henry married on the 6th of January 1540, but only remained married for around 6 months, when Henry then sought an annulment. Anne went on to live a life in luxury, and because she didn't make a fuss about the marriage being annulled, she and the king remained on good terms. She was rewarded with a generous allowance and property in Kent. Anne was even invited to Hampton Court Palace at Christmas, where on one occasion she danced with the new Queen, Catherine Howard. Anne was only 24 years of age when she married Henry, and although in today's terms 41 is rather young, back then in Tudor England Anne of Cleves died after surviving all the other wives of the king, and she had 17 years to live out her life after being made to marry a stranger. It is believed that Anne of Cleves had been quite unwell for quite a while, a few months in fact prior to the 12th of July 1557. Anne found herself bedridden and writing her will. The will demonstrated Anne's character, as in it she shows great kindness and fondness to her household. She left money to her ladies, gentlemen, yeomen, grooms and the children of the house, listing every member of her household by name, and also asked that her stepdaughter Mary I made sure that the rents received from her lands at Michaelmas would be used to meet the expenses of her household. Anne also left jewellery to her family, a ring to Catherine Brandon, Duchess of Suffolk, and another ring to the Countess of Arundel, and jewels to her stepdaughters Mary and Elizabeth. In recompense for these jewels, she asked Mary to make sure that her servants were rewarded for their long service to her, and she asked Elizabeth to take on one of her maids. When Anne died, she had an appropriate funeral for her status. You see, Mary I was her friend as well as her stepdaughter, and she did everything in her power to ensure this. Before her funeral, her coffin was surrounded by tapes that were burned by night and day, and her coffin was also covered in cloth of gold. And then, as recorded by the diarist Henry VIII, records that on the 3rd of August 1557, Anne of Cleves was taken from Chelsea to Westminster to be buried. And then on the 4th of August it was also recorded that there was a great requiem mass for Anne, where a godly sermon by the Lord Abbot of Westminster. Anne's coffin was then taken to its tomb, and her body interred with a cloth of gold laid over her. Then her officers broke their staves over her tomb and placed them with her, as to signify the end of their service to her. Anne is the only wife of Henry VIII to be buried in Westminster, and her tomb is on the south side of the high altar, decorated with carvings of a crown and the initials AC, and skulls and crossbones as well as a lion's head. The sad point is that Anne of Cleves is remembered as the wife with the least significance, and maybe that's why she's the least spoken about. But actually, Anne was an international figure with some prominence, and Anne was also a woman who used her own intelligence to survive life within the English court and remain an independent woman. It is even believed that although Anne allowed Henry to seek an annulment and did not fight it, perhaps knowing about the fate of Anne Boleyn, that she actually never really accepted it, and still thought of herself as the wife of Henry VIII and subsequently Queen of England. So when Henry died, Anne then saw herself as his widow. But what actually caused Anne of Cleves' death? When Anne became unwell, it is thought that Mary allowed her to live in Chelsea Old Manor, the home where Catherine Parr lived out her years. There is not much information surrounding the cause of death for Anne, only that she died 8 weeks before her 42nd birthday, and that the most likely cause was cancer. Anne's tomb is in Westminster, but it is not easy to find. But if you do manage to spot it, you will see that the epitaph simply reads the following: Anne of Cleves, Queen of England, born 1515, died 1557. Although Anne has been noted as the last of Henry and his wives to die, dying a full 9 years after Catherine Parr, Anne was not in fact the eldest, as Catherine Parr was 50 and Anne was only 41. Anne was probably the luckiest of Henry's wives. She didn't face the threat of execution, and she obviously didn't lose her head. But the question I find myself asking is, was Anne happy? Did she die feeling that she had achieved her dreams? Or was she content with the hand she had been drawn in life? Unfortunately, we will never know. Maybe being divorced because of your looks was a good thing when it came to Henry VIII. It was certainly better than what Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard experienced. But nevertheless, I do hope that the once Queen of England was happy and fulfilled, for she had no children and no recorded lovers or husbands. All that is recorded is that after the death of Henry's next wife, Catherine Howard, Anne put her name forward to remarry the king. She wanted to be queen again, but alas, Henry said no. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.